The baby's cry cuts off mid-wail. Karen's breath catches in the darkness of the hallway. She stands frozen outside the nursery door, her heart hammering against her ribs as the silence stretches, thick, unnatural, wrong. Something inside her screams to turn back, to return to her room and pretend she heard nothing. But Liam's sudden quiet pulls at her maternal instincts like a rope around her chest. She reaches for the doorknob with trembling fingers and pushes the door open just enough to see inside. What she witnesses steals the air from her lungs. Olivia stands over the crib in perfect stillness, her silhouette backlit by the pale nightlight, her posture rigid and predatory. The moment Olivia's head turns, Karen sees eyes that hold no warmth, no humanity, only cold calculation. "If you ever," Olivia whispers, each word dropping like ice into water, "dare question what happens in this house, I will make sure you never work again. Not here. Not anywhere. Do you understand me?" The threat hangs in the air between them, suffocating and absolute. Karen can barely nod before her legs carry her backward into the hall. This is the moment everything changes, the moment she realizes the danger lurking beneath the mansion's glittering surface. Welcome to Stories by Jason. Before we go any further, I need you to do something for me. Hit that subscribe button right now because what happens next in this story is so unbelievable, so shocking, that you'll want to hear every single detail. This isn't just another drama. This is about courage, deception, and how one woman's refusal to stay silent changed everything. Trust me, you don't want to miss what's coming. Now, let me take you back 3 weeks earlier, to the day Karen first walked through the towering iron gates of Sylvester Donovan's estate. The mansion was even more impressive in person than in the photographs Karen had seen during her interview. Towering marble columns framed the entrance. Crystal chandeliers caught the afternoon sunlight streaming through floor-to-ceiling windows. Every surface seemed to gleam with wealth and careful maintenance. But despite all the luxury, despite the grandeur, the house felt strangely hollow. Karen's footsteps echoed through the empty foyer as she wheeled her small suitcase across the polished floor. The silence wasn't peaceful. It was the kind of quiet that made you whisper without knowing why. She'd been hired as a live-in maid and nanny, primarily to care for baby Liam while his father, Sylvester Donovan, traveled for business. The agency had called it a prestigious opportunity, and the salary was more than Karen had made in any previous position. She should have felt excited, grateful even. Instead, something about the emptiness of that enormous house made her skin prickle with unease. Olivia appeared at the top of the grand staircase as if she'd been waiting for her entrance. Dressed in designer athleisure that probably cost more than Karen's monthly rent, she descended the stairs with the practiced grace of someone accustomed to being watched. Her hair was perfect, her makeup flawless, her smile bright, but when her eyes swept over Karen, there was no warmth in them. Just a cold, assessing glance that made Karen feel less like a person and more like a piece of furniture being evaluated for quality. "You must be the new help," Olivia said, her voice pleasant enough but somehow dismissive. "Karen, is it?" "Yes, ma'am. It's nice to meet you." Olivia's smile tightened just slightly. "Sylvester is in Hong Kong closing a deal. He'll be back in 10 days. In the meantime, you'll take your instructions from me. The baby's nursery is on the 2nd floor, East Wing. I trust you can manage to find it." Before Karen could respond, Olivia's phone buzzed. She glanced at the screen, her attention already elsewhere. "I have a spa appointment. Make yourself familiar with the house. Feed the baby at 6. She turned on her heel and walked away, leaving Karen standing alone in that cavernous entryway, her suitcase handle still gripped tightly in her hand. Karen found the nursery easily enough. It was decorated in soft blues and creams, filled with expensive furniture and toys that looked like they'd never been touched. And there, in a designer crib that probably cost thousands of dollars, was baby Liam. He was crying, not the angry, demanding cry of a hungry baby, but a sad, lonely sound that tugged at Karen's heart. She approached the crib slowly, speaking in the soft, soothing voice she'd used with dozens of children in her previous positions. "Hey there, little one. Hey, sweet boy. I'm Karen. I'm here to take care of you." The moment was magical in its simplicity. Liam's crying quieted as her voice washed over him. When she lifted him gently from the crib, he molded against her shoulder as if he'd been waiting for exactly this kind of warmth. His tiny fist clutched at her shirt. His breathing gradually evened out. When Karen began to hum an old lullaby her grandmother had taught her, Liam actually smiled, a genuine, heart-melting baby smile that made everything worthwhile. For the first time since entering the mansion, Karen felt herself relax. This part she understood. This part she was good at. Babies didn't care about wealth or status. They only knew kindness, safety, and love. And as she rocked Liam in her arms, watching his eyelids grow heavy, she made a silent promise to this child. Whatever else happened in this house, she would make sure he was cared for. But even in those first peaceful hours, Karen noticed things that disturbed her. When Olivia returned from her spa appointment that evening, she barely glanced at Liam. She didn't ask if he'd eaten or if he'd napped. She didn't reach for him or make those automatic cooing sounds that most people make around babies. Instead, her face flickered with something that looked almost like irritation when Liam began to fuss. "He's very needy," Olivia commented, examining her manicured nails. "Constantly demanding attention." Karen, who had been preparing Liam's evening bottle, looked up in surprise. "He's actually quite content. He just needs." "I didn't ask for your opinion." Olivia's tone was sharp, her eyes suddenly focused and hard. "You're here to follow instructions, not to give parenting advice." The shift happened so quickly that Karen felt whiplash. She nodded, keeping her eyes down, feeling her cheeks flush. "Of course, I apologize." But as Olivia swept past her toward the door, she paused. Her hand shot out and gripped Karen's wrist, not hard enough to bruise, but firm enough to make Karen's pulse spike with alarm. "One more thing, Karen. Sylvester values discretion. Whatever happens in this house stays in this house. We have an understanding about that, don't we?" "Yes, ma'am." Olivia's grip lingered a moment longer before releasing. "But I'd hate for there to be any misunderstandings about your position here." That night, Karen lay in her small bedroom in the staff quarters, staring at the ceiling and unable to sleep. The house was so quiet she could hear her own heartbeat. Something about Olivia's warning echoed in her mind, mixing with the coldness she'd seen in the woman's eyes when she looked at Liam. It was probably nothing. Rich people could be strange, distant. Maybe Olivia just wasn't maternal. Maybe Karen was reading too much into a simple boundary-setting conversation. But her instincts, honed by years of working in other people's homes and caring for vulnerable children, kept whispering that something was wrong. Something was off. And as she finally drifted into uneasy sleep, she couldn't shake the feeling that she'd walked into something far more dangerous than a simple nanny position. She just didn't know how dangerous. Not yet. Which brings us back to that midnight moment. The moment when the baby's crying stopped and Karen's worst fears crystallized into terrifying reality. The moment when she pushed open that nursery door and found Olivia standing over Liam with that cold, predatory stillness. The moment when the threat was spoken aloud and Karen understood that speaking up could cost her everything. As Karen backed away from the nursery, her heart pounding and her hands shaking, she realized she faced an impossible choice. Stay silent and keep her job, her reputation, her future, or risk everything to protect a child who had no one else to fight for him. She didn't know yet that this was only the beginning. She didn't know that the darkness in this mansion ran deeper than she could imagine. And she didn't know that her courage, however small and frightened it felt in this moment, would ultimately be the thing that saved an innocent life. But that night, backing away from Olivia's venomous warning, all Karen knew was fear. And the terrible certainty that something very wrong was happening behind the gleaming facade of Sylvester Donovan's perfect life. But that night, backing away from Olivia's venomous warning, all Karen knew was fear. And the terrible certainty that something very wrong was happening behind the gleaming facade of Sylvester Donovan's perfect life. The next morning arrived with deceptive normalcy. Sunlight streamed through the mansion's tall windows, painting everything in shades of gold that made the previous night feel almost like a bad dream. Almost. But as Karen prepared Liam's morning bottle in the pristine kitchen, her hands still trembled slightly, and she kept glancing over her shoulder. She measured the formula carefully, added the warmed water, and shook the bottle according to the exact specifications she'd been given. But when she held it up to the light to check the mixture, something made her pause. The liquid looked slightly off, cloudy in a way that didn't seem quite right. She'd prepared hundreds of bottles in her career, and this one just looked wrong. "What are you doing?" Olivia's voice cut through the kitchen like a blade. Karen turned, startled. She hadn't heard Olivia come in. "I was just checking the formula. It looks a little—" Before she could finish the sentence, Olivia crossed the space between them in 3 sharp strides and snatched the bottle from Karen's hand. The movement was so sudden, so aggressive, that Karen actually flinched backward. "You mix too slowly," Olivia said, her voice tight with barely concealed irritation. "The baby is hungry. I'll feed him myself. I can do it, Tim. That's what I'm here for. I said I'll handle it." Olivia's eyes flashed with something dangerous. "Are you questioning me again, Karen? Because I thought we had an understanding about that." The threat from the previous night hung heavy in the air between them. Karen swallowed hard and stepped back, her pulse racing. "No, of course not." Olivia's expression softened into a smile that never reached her eyes. "But why don't you take the morning to clean the guest rooms? I'll take care of Liam's feeding." As Olivia walked away with the bottle, Karen felt a chill run down her spine that had nothing to do with the air conditioning. Something about that cloudy formula, about Olivia's aggressive reaction, about the way she'd insisted on feeding the baby herself, it all felt deeply, fundamentally wrong. But what could Karen do? What could she say? She had no proof, only a gut feeling that was becoming harder and harder to ignore. 2 days later, Karen was changing Liam's diaper when she noticed the first bruise. It was small, roughly the size of a thumbprint, darkening the pale skin of his tiny forearm. Her breath caught in her throat as she gently examined it, her nursing instincts immediately on alert. "What happened here, sweet boy?" she murmured, carefully checking the rest of his body. Babies could get bruises from normal bumps and tumbles, but Liam was only 7 months old, not yet mobile enough to injure himself this way. "Is there a problem?" Olivia's voice came from the nursery doorway, making Karen jump for what felt like the 100th time that week. Karen turned, still cradling Liam protectively. "There's a bruise on his arm. I was just wondering." "He bruises easily." Olivia's response was immediate, almost rehearsed. The pediatrician mentioned it at his last checkup. Sensitive skin runs in Sylvester's family. "I just wanted to make sure." "Are you doubting me again, Karen?" Olivia stepped into the room, and suddenly the spacious nursery felt suffocating. "Because it's starting to feel like you question everything I say. Maybe you don't trust my judgment when it comes to this child." The gaslighting was so smooth, so practiced, that for a moment Karen actually questioned herself. Maybe she was being paranoid. Maybe Liam did bruise easily. Maybe she was seeing problems where there were none because of that one strange midnight encounter. But 3 days after that, she found another bruise. This one near his ribs, darker and more pronounced. And when she gently touched it during his bath, Liam whimpered, a sound of pain that made her heart break. This time, when Olivia offered an explanation, "He fell during bath time yesterday when I was bathing him," Karen nodded silently. But inside, a cold certainty was growing. 7-month-old babies didn't fall hard enough to bruise their ribs. And even if they did, wouldn't Olivia have mentioned the fall when it happened? Wouldn't she have checked to make sure he was okay? The silence Karen maintained felt like betrayal, but Olivia's threats echoed constantly in her mind. Speak up and lose everything. Question her and be destroyed. What made everything worse, what made Karen feel like she was losing her grip on reality, was watching Olivia transform whenever Sylvester called. 3 times a week, like clockwork, Olivia's phone would ring with a video call from Hong Kong. And every single time, she became a completely different person. Karen watched from across the room as Olivia cooed at the screen, her voice dripping with affection. "I miss you so much, darling. The house feels so empty without you." She'd blow kisses, laugh at his jokes, and then, this was the part that made Karen's stomach turn, she'd pivot the camera to show Liam. "Say hi to Daddy, sweetheart." Olivia would coo, her voice syrupy sweet as she tickled Liam's feet. The baby would smile, and Olivia would make all the right maternal sounds. He's doing so wonderfully, growing so fast. Karen and I make such a good team taking care of him. Karen would force herself to smile and wave at the camera when Sylvester greeted her, playing along with the charade because what else could she do? Tell a billionaire over a video call that his girlfriend was abusing his son? With no proof except her word against Olivia's? She'd be dismissed immediately, painted as a disgruntled employee with an overactive imagination. But the moment the call ended, Olivia's mask would slip. The warmth would drain from her face like water from a sink. She'd hand Liam back to Karen without a word, sometimes roughly enough to make the baby cry, and walk away without looking back. The coldness in her eyes in those moments was absolute. Karen began to dread those video calls, because they made her question her own perception. Was she imagining the cruelty? Was Olivia actually a loving stepmother who was just stressed? But then she'd look at the bruises, remember the cloudy bottle, recall the midnight threat, and no, she knew something terrible was happening in this house. The first time Karen found the nursery door locked, she thought she'd made a mistake. Liam was crying, a desperate, frightened sound that pulled at every maternal instinct she possessed, but when she tried the handle, it wouldn't turn. She knocked gently. "Ma'am? Olivia?" The baby sounds distressed. I'm handling it." Olivia's voice came muffled through the door, tight with irritation. "I'm calming him down. Go attend to your other duties." "But he sounds—" "Karen." The warning in that single word was unmistakable. "Leave. Now." Karen stood in that hallway for 5 agonizing minutes, listening to Liam cry, her fists clenched at her sides and tears of frustration burning in her eyes. Every instinct screamed at her to break down that door, to grab the baby and run. But where would she run to? Who would believe her? She had no family, no powerful connections, no safety net. One phone call from Olivia to the agency that had placed her, and she'd never work again. When the door finally opened 20 minutes later, Olivia emerged looking slightly disheveled, a thin sheen of sweat on her forehead despite the house's perfect climate control. "He's sleeping now," she said curtly, brushing past Karen without meeting her eyes. Karen entered the nursery on shaking legs. Liam was indeed asleep, but it wasn't the peaceful sleep of a contented baby. His face was red and blotchy from crying, his breath still hitching occasionally even in sleep. And there, on his cheek, was a faint red mark that looked almost like... She couldn't let herself think it. Couldn't let herself believe what her eyes were telling her. But when it happened again 3 days later, another locked door, another bout of desperate crying, another suspicious mark, Karen couldn't deny the truth anymore. Something was happening behind those locked doors. Something that made a baby scream. Something that left marks. And she was doing nothing to stop it. When Sylvester finally came home, the entire atmosphere of the mansion shifted. Karen heard his car pull up and watched from an upstairs window as he emerged, tall and handsome in an expensive suit, his face breaking into a genuine smile as he entered his home. She carried Liam downstairs and the transformation in the billionaire was immediate and beautiful. "There's my boy." Sylvester's whole face lit up as he reached for his son. The love was obvious, undeniable, radiating from every gesture. He held Liam like he was the most precious thing in the world, kissing his forehead, making silly faces that earned delighted giggles. For the first time in 2 weeks, Karen felt a flicker of hope. This man clearly loved his child. Surely he would see what was happening. Surely she could find a way to speak to him privately, to show him the bruises, to voice her concerns. He would listen. He would believe her. He had to. But Olivia was already 3 steps ahead. That evening, as Karen was putting away Liam's toys in the nursery, she heard raised voices from the floor below. Her stomach dropped. She crept to the top of the stairs, her heart pounding. "Just don't trust her, Sylvester." Olivia's voice was thick with tears, tears Karen had never seen her shed for any genuine reason. "She questions everything I do. Acts like I'm not capable of caring for Liam. Do you know she actually accused me of letting him get hurt?" "Olivia, calm down. I'm sure it's just... she's too attached to him." Olivia's voice cracked convincingly. "It's unhealthy. The way she hovers, the way she looks at me like I'm the enemy. I've tried to work with her, I really have, but she's been nothing but disrespectful and careless. Yesterday she left the gate at the top of the stairs open. He could have been hurt. Karen's blood ran cold. That was a lie. A complete fabrication. She had never left that gate open. She checked it obsessively, multiple times a day. She heard footsteps approaching and quickly backed away from the stairs, her mind racing. Should she go down there? Defend herself? Tell Sylvester everything she'd witnessed? But when Sylvester appeared in the nursery doorway moments later, the look on his face stopped her cold. Confusion, concern, and something else, that he was doubting her. Karen, could we talk for a moment? His voice was kind, but there was a professional distance there that hadn't existed before. Olivia had already poisoned the well, and Karen realized with sinking horror that she was fighting a battle she'd already lost. Of course, Mr. Donovan, she said quietly, her voice steadier than she felt. As she followed him downstairs, she glimpsed Olivia in the hallway. For just a second their eyes met. And Olivia smiled, a small, triumphant smile that said clearer than words, "I warned you. And now you're going to pay." Sylvester led Karen into his study, a room she'd only glimpsed before while cleaning. Floor-to-ceiling bookshelves lined the walls, and a massive desk dominated the space. Everything spoke of power, success, and the kind of wealth that could crush someone like Karen without a second thought. He gestured to a leather chair across from his desk, and she sat, her hands clasped tightly in her lap to keep them from shaking. "Karen," he began, his tone measured but strained, "Olivia has expressed some serious concerns about your performance and behavior since you've been with us." Before Karen could respond, the study door opened. Olivia entered, dabbing at her eyes with a tissue, her face the perfect portrait of a woman pushed to her emotional limit. "I'm sorry, darling. I know you wanted to handle this privately, but I think I should be here. These are serious accusations, and I want to make sure everything is clear." Sylvester nodded, though Karen noticed a flicker of hesitation in his expression. He wasn't entirely comfortable with this, she realized. There was still a chance, a small one, to reach him. "Mr. Donovan," Karen started, keeping her voice calm and professional despite the fear clawing at her chest, "I've tried my best to care for Liam. He's a wonderful baby, and I would never do anything to—" "That's exactly the problem," Olivia interrupted, her voice breaking with calculated emotion. "You act like he's your baby. You undermine me at every turn, question my judgment, hover over him like I'm some kind of threat." She turned to Sylvester, fresh tears spilling down her cheeks. "I've tried to be patient. I've tried to work with her. But she makes me feel like an outsider in what's supposed to be our home." "That's not true," Karen said, her voice rising slightly despite her efforts to stay calm. "I've never tried to undermine you. I've only ever been concerned about Liam's welfare." "See?" Olivia gestured at Karen, her voice trembling. "Even now, she's implying that I don't care about his welfare. That I'm somehow neglecting him." "The bruises," Karen started, knowing she was taking a risk but unable to stay silent any longer. "There have been bruises on Liam. Multiple times. And the locked nursery doors when he was crying." Olivia's eyes widened in what looked like genuine shock, but Karen could see the calculation behind the performance. "Bruises? Sylvester, I told you he's been bruising easily." The pediatrician confirmed it. "And as for locked doors," she laughed, but it came out more like a sob, "I never locked any doors." "Karen, why are you making up these things?" "I'm not making anything up." Karen's composure was cracking now, desperation bleeding into her voice. "Mr. Donovan, please. Something isn't right. That night I found her standing over Liam's crib, and she threatened me." "Threatened you?" Olivia's hand flew to her chest. "I did no such thing." "Sylvester, you see what I mean? She's paranoid. She's creating this narrative where I'm some kind of villain." She turned to Karen, her expression almost pitying. "I found you in the nursery at midnight. You startled me, and I simply reminded you about household boundaries. How has that become a threat in your mind?" The gaslighting was masterful. Karen could feel the ground shifting beneath her feet, her own certainty wavering under the onslaught of Olivia's perfectly crafted lies. When she looked at Sylvester, she saw the doubt written clearly across his face. He wanted to believe her, she could see that, but Olivia's performance was too polished, too convincing. And yesterday, Olivia continued, pressing her advantage, she left the safety gate open at the top of the stairs. Liam could have crawled through and fallen. When I corrected her, she became defensive and hostile. That's a lie. Karen stood up, her chair scraping against the hardwood floor. I never left that gate open. I check it constantly. She's lying, Mr. Donovan. Please, you have to believe me. Karen. Sylvester's voice cut through her plea, firm and final. I think it's best if we end your employment here. Effective immediately. The words hit her like a physical blow. Karen felt her legs weaken, felt the room tilt slightly. Mr. Donovan, please. I'm telling you the truth. Your son is in danger. That's enough. His voice hardened, and Karen saw Olivia's influence written in every line of his face. I appreciate your service, but this clearly isn't working out. I'll have my accountant prepare 2 weeks' severance pay. I'd like you to pack your things and leave tonight. Sylvester, maybe that's too harsh, Olivia interjected, her voice gentle now, magnanimous in victory. Perhaps we could give her until morning? It's already late. He nodded, his expression softening slightly at Olivia's apparent kindness. Yes, of course. You can leave first thing tomorrow morning. I'll have a car arranged. Karen wanted to scream, to grab him by the shoulders and force him to see the truth. But she could read the finality in his posture, see the wall that had gone up between them. Olivia had won. The power imbalance Karen had feared from the beginning had proved insurmountable. I understand, she whispered, her voice hollow. May I say goodbye to Liam in the morning? Sylvester glanced at Olivia, who dabbed at her eyes again and nodded graciously. Of course. Despite everything, I know you care about him. The false kindness in those words made Karen feel sick. Karen spent the night in her small room, unable to sleep, staring at the ceiling and wrestling with her conscience. Should she call someone? But who? Child Protective Services? With what evidence? Bruises that Olivia had explained away. Her word against a wealthy, well-connected couple? She'd worked in enough wealthy households to know how those battles ended. The rich closed ranks, and people like her were crushed without a second thought. At dawn, she packed her single suitcase with mechanical precision, her movements automatic while her mind raced through scenarios, possibilities, desperate plans that all ended in failure. When she finished, she carried her bag to the nursery for one last goodbye. Liam was just waking up, his little face breaking into a smile when he saw her. Karen lifted him from the crib, holding him close, breathing in his baby scent and fighting back tears. I'm so sorry, she whispered against his soft hair. Tried. I promise I tried. How touching. Karen turned to find Olivia leaning in the doorway, watching them with cold amusement. Gone was the tearful, wounded woman from the night before. This was the real Olivia, calculating, cruel, and absolutely certain of her power. You should go, Olivia said, moving into the room. The car is waiting. Karen gently placed Liam back in his crib, her hands trembling. She turned to face Olivia, searching for any hint of humanity in those cold eyes. Please, she whispered. Whatever I did to offend you, whatever you think I did, don't take it out on him. He's innocent. He's just a baby. Olivia smiled, a genuine smile this time, sharp and satisfied. She moved close, so close Karen could smell her expensive perfume, and when she spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper. Stay silent if you want a future, Karen. One word to anyone about your delusional theories, and I will destroy you. I have lawyers, connections, and money that could bury you so deep you'll never see daylight. Do you understand me? Karen understood perfectly. She understood that she was leaving an innocent child in the hands of a monster. She understood that her silence was a form of cowardice, even if it was born of self-preservation. And she understood that she would carry this guilt for the rest of her life. She picked up her suitcase and walked out of the nursery without another word, Liam's confused cries following her down the hallway. 23 hours later, Karen was sitting in a cheap motel room, staring at her phone and trying to figure out her next move, when a breaking news alert flashed across her screen: Billionaire's infant son hospitalized in critical condition. Her blood turned to ice. With shaking hands, she clicked the article, scanning the sparse details. Baby Liam Donovan, 7 months old, found unresponsive by household staff. Rushed to Mercy General Hospital. Condition unknown. Police investigating. Karen's vision blurred with tears. She'd known. She'd known something like this would happen, and she'd walked away anyway. The guilt was suffocating, crushing her chest until she could barely breathe. Her phone rang, making her jump. A known number. She answered with trembling hands. "Is this Karen Mitchell?" A woman's voice, official and crisp. "Yes. This is Detective Sarah Chen with the Metro Police Department. We need you to come in for questioning regarding an incident involving Liam Donovan. How soon can you be at the precinct?" Karen's world tilted. What happened? Is he alive? We'll discuss everything when you arrive. We're sending a patrol car to pick you up. Please be ready in 15 minutes. The line went dead. Karen learned the details in pieces, extracted from the tight-lipped officers who drove her to the hospital instead of the police station. Liam had been found unresponsive by a night security guard making his rounds at 6:47 a.m. The guard had heard unusual silence, no baby sounds at all, and checked the nursery. Liam was barely breathing, his lips tinged blue. Paramedics arrived within 8 minutes. They'd stabilized him enough to transport, but the prognosis remained uncertain. When Karen arrived at Mercy General, the scene was controlled chaos. Police officers stood guard outside a private waiting room. Reporters were already gathering in the lobby, held back by hospital security. And somewhere in this maze of sterile corridors, Liam was fighting for his life. Detective Sarah Chen found Karen in the hallway, a sharp-eyed woman in her mid-40s with an expression that gave nothing away. "Ms. Mitchell, thank you for coming in. We have some questions." "Is he going to be okay?" Karen's voice cracked. "Please, just tell me if he's going to be okay." "He's in critical but stable condition. The doctors are running tests." Chen's expression softened fractionally. "I understand you were recently employed as his caregiver?" "Yes. Until yesterday. They fired me." Karen's words tumbled out in a rush. "But I tried to tell them. I tried to warn Mr. Donovan that something was wrong, that Olivia was." "Slow down." Chen held up a hand, her eyes suddenly laser-focused. "What do you mean you tried to warn him? About what specifically?" Before Karen could answer, a commotion erupted down the hallway. Olivia swept into view, her face a mask of perfectly performed devastation, with Sylvester close behind looking like a man in shock. When Olivia's gaze landed on Karen, her expression transformed into something between fury and vindication. "That's her." Olivia's voice rang through the corridor. "That's the woman I told you about. She must have done something to Liam before she left. She threatened me when I fired her, told me I'd be sorry." "That's not true." Karen protested, but her voice was drowned out by Olivia's theatrical sobbing. "She was obsessed with him," Olivia continued, clutching Sylvester's arm. "Possessive. When we let her go, she must have done something to his bottles, put something in his formula." "Ms. Hartford, please." Detective Chen's voice cut through the hysteria with professional calm. "We need to speak with Ms. Mitchell privately. I'll come find you shortly." But the damage was done. Karen saw the horror and suspicion in Sylvester's eyes as he looked at her. He believed Olivia. Of course he did. Why would a grieving billionaire doubt his girlfriend when there was a convenient scapegoat standing right in front of him? Detective Chen led Karen into a private consultation room and closed the door. The detective's expression was unreadable as she gestured for Karen to sit. "Ms. Mitchell, I need you to tell me everything. Start from the beginning." And so Karen did. The words poured out of her, the midnight threat, the cloudy bottles, the bruises, the locked doors, Olivia's transformation during video calls, the systematic gaslighting. She held nothing back, knowing this might be her only chance to tell the truth, even if it meant incriminating herself in the eyes of people who already saw her as the villain. When she finished, Detective Chen was quiet for a long moment, her pen hovering over her notepad. Finally, she looked up, and something in her expression had shifted. "These bruises you mentioned," Chen said carefully. "Did you photograph them?" Karen's heart sank. "No. I should have, but I was afraid. Olivia threatened my career and she broke off, shame burning in her chest. "I was a coward. Or you were a woman with no power trying to survive in an impossible situation." Chen's voice was surprisingly gentle. "Ms. Mitchell, I want you to know that Liam's preliminary blood work came back 20 minutes ago. They found sedatives in his system. Specifically, a benzodiazepine that's not prescribed to anyone in that household." Karen felt her breath catch. "Then you believe me? I'm saying the physical evidence supports that something was being given to that baby. Something that shouldn't have been there." Chen leaned forward, her gaze intense. "Now, Ms. Hartford claims you had access to the baby's bottles and could have tampered with them before you left. What do you say to that?" "I would never," Karen started, then forced herself to slow down, to think. "Detective, if I drugged him, wouldn't it have happened sooner? While I was still there. I left yesterday morning. It's been over 24 hours. Chen nodded slowly, making a note. "Good point. Though to be fair, depending on the substance and dosage, delayed effects are possible." "But I didn't do anything." The desperation was back in Karen's voice. "Please, you have to believe me. I tried to protect him. I tried to speak up, and they fired me for it. Olivia is lying. She's been lying from the beginning." The detective studied her for a long moment, and Karen felt her entire future balanced on whatever conclusion this woman was drawing. Finally, Chen closed her notebook. "Ms. Mitchell, I'm going to be honest with you. Right now, you're a person of interest in this case. Don't leave town. We'll likely have more questions." She stood, then paused at the door. "But between you and me, your story has the ring of truth. And Ms. Hartford's story—" She shook her head slightly. "Let's just say there are some inconsistencies we'll be looking into." "Like what?" Karen asked, hope flickering to life in her chest. Detective Chen smiled grimly. "Like the fact that she claimed she was with the baby all night, but the security guard's report says he saw her leaving the mansion at 11 p.m. and not returning until 4 a.m. Like the fact that her timeline for when she last fed the baby doesn't match the metabolization rate of the sedatives found in his system. Like the fact that she seems far more concerned with pointing fingers than with her supposed stepson's condition." She opened the door, then looked back at Karen. "Sometimes, Ms. Mitchell, the truth has a way of coming out. Even when powerful people try to bury it. Stay available. And for what it's worth, I don't think you hurt that baby. I think you tried to save him." As Detective Chen left, Karen slumped in her chair, tears finally streaming down her face. Liam was fighting for his life in a hospital room somewhere in this building. She'd been painted as the villain. And Olivia was still free, still performing her role as the devastated stepmother. But there were cracks appearing in Olivia's carefully constructed lies. Small cracks, maybe, but Detective Chen had seen them. And sometimes, Karen thought, remembering her grandmother's words, sometimes small cracks were all you needed to bring down even the strongest walls. She just hoped the truth would emerge before it was too late. While Karen sat in that sterile hospital room wrestling with fear and uncertainty, Detective Chen was already assembling her team. The inconsistencies in Olivia's story had triggered every investigative instinct the detective possessed, and years of experience had taught her to trust those instincts. "I want a warrant for the Donovan mansion," Chen told her partner, Detective Marcus Rodriguez, as they stood in the hospital corridor. "Focus on Olivia Hartford's personal spaces, bedroom, bathroom, any areas she considers private." "Based on what grounds?" Rodriguez asked, though he was already pulling out his phone. "The boyfriend's not going to like us tearing through his house. Based on the grounds that a 7-month-old baby is in intensive care with sedatives in his system, and the woman claiming to be his caregiver has a timeline that doesn't add up." Chen's voice was steel. "And if Donovan doesn't like it, he can talk to my captain." The warrant came through within 2 hours. Fast, even by urgent standards. Judge Patricia Woodward had 3 grandchildren of her own and didn't appreciate the details Chen had laid out in her request. By 3 p.m., a forensics team was methodically working through Olivia's private bathroom, a palatial space complete with a soaking tub, separate shower, and enough counter space to stock a small pharmacy. They'd already bagged several prescription bottles, sleeping pills, anti-anxiety medication, all legitimately prescribed to Olivia Hartford. Nothing unusual there. But then forensic technician Amy Liu opened the medicine cabinet's bottom drawer, the one that stuck slightly and required an extra tug. "Detective." Her voice carried a note of tension that made Chen's pulse quicken. "I think you need to see this." Tucked in the back of the drawer, behind expired bottles of cough syrup and half-used tubes of prescription cream, were 3 small vials. No labels. No prescription information. Just clear liquid in pharmaceutical-grade containers. "Bag it all," Chen ordered, "and get it to the lab. I wanted the results yesterday." While the physical search continued, Detective Rodriguez was working a different angle. Olivia had voluntarily surrendered her phone earlier, confident, perhaps too confident, that it contained nothing incriminating. But Rodriguez had spent 15 years in digital forensics before making detective, and he knew that people often forgot how much their devices remembered. The surface level was clean. Text messages with Sylvester were appropriately affectionate. Social media showed the perfect life, glamorous photos, inspirational quotes, carefully curated moments of domestic bliss. But Rodriguez went deeper, into deleted files, encrypted messaging apps, cloud backups that people assumed were private. That's where he found them. Messages between Olivia and someone listed in her contacts only as MK. A conversation that had been carefully deleted from her primary messaging app but remained backed up in the cloud. Rodriguez's eyes narrowed as he scrolled through the exchange, his expression growing darker with each message. "MK, how much longer? This is taking too long. Olivia, these things require patience. Can't look suspicious. MK, the timeline we discussed was 6 months. We're past that. Olivia, then maybe you should try changing diapers and playing the devoted stepmother. It's exhausting. MK, just get it done. We have too much invested to back out now. Once the loose ends are tied up, we move forward with the plan. Olivia, the help is becoming a problem. She notices too much. MK, then handle it. You've always been good at that." The messages continued, becoming more explicit, more damning. References to inheritance access, and life insurance policies, and the kid being the only obstacle. Rodriguez felt his stomach turn as the implications became clear. This wasn't just abuse. This was premeditated. He pulled up Olivia's contact list and ran MK through the department's database. The match came back within minutes. Marcus Kellerman, age 42, employed as an investment advisor at Donovan Capital Management. Sylvester's right-hand man in financial matters. "Chen," Rodriguez called across the precinct floor, his voice urgent. "You need to see this. Now." Sylvester Donovan had spent the last 4 hours in a private waiting room, watching doctors and nurses hurry past, waiting for updates that came in frustratingly sparse increments. Liam was stable. Liam was sedated for his own safety. Liam was undergoing more tests. Liam's prognosis remained uncertain. Olivia sat beside him, her hand on his arm, her presence seemingly supportive. But Sylvester kept replaying Karen's words in his mind, kept seeing the desperate honesty in her eyes when she tried to tell him something was wrong. Had he made a terrible mistake? When Detective Chen entered the waiting room, her expression was grave, and she asked to speak with Sylvester privately. Olivia started to follow, but Chen's voice was firm. "Just Mr. Donovan, please." They moved to a small office down the hall. Chen closed the door and laid out several evidence bags on the desk between them. "Mr. Donovan, we found these in Ms. Hartford's bathroom. Preliminary testing shows they contain midazolam, the same sedative found in your son's bloodstream." Sylvester stared at the vials, his brain refusing to process what his eyes were seeing. That's not possible. Olivia wouldn't." "There's more." Chen pulled out a tablet and turned it toward him. "We found messages between Ms. Hartford and Marcus Kellerman, your investment advisor. I need you to read these." As Sylvester scrolled through the messages, the color drained from his face. Each word was a hammer blow, shattering the reality he'd believed in. The woman he'd loved, the woman he'd trusted with his son, had been systematically planning what? His son's death? The inheritance? Insurance money? No, he whispered, but the evidence was irrefutable. No, this can't be. Mr. Donovan, Chen's voice was gentle but firm. Karen Mitchell tried to tell you. She saw the bruises, the strange behavior, the threats. She tried to protect your son, and you fired her for it. The guilt hit Sylvester like a physical blow. He remembered Karen's desperate pleas, the fear in her eyes, the way she'd begged him to listen. And he'd chosen to believe Olivia's tears over Karen's truth. He'd sent away the one person trying to save his child. "Oh God," he choked out, burying his face in his hands. "Oh God, what have I done?" His phone buzzed. A text from Olivia. "Where are you? I need you." Chen saw his expression change. "Don't respond. Don't let her know we're onto her. We need to." But before she could finish, her radio crackled to life. "All units, be advised. Suspect Olivia Hartford and Marcus Kellerman have fled the hospital parking lot in a black Mercedes, license plate." Damn it. Chen was already moving, gesturing for Sylvester to stay put. "Lock this door behind me. Don't open it for anyone but me." Olivia had realized something was wrong the moment Sylvester left with the detective. She'd seen the change in his body language, the way the officer's eyes had shifted when they looked at her. Years of conning, manipulating, and staying one step ahead of consequences had given her finely tuned instincts for when a situation was deteriorating. She'd texted Marcus, "Now. Back entrance. 3 minutes." The black Mercedes was already running when she slipped out through a service exit. Marcus looked pale but determined as she slid into the passenger seat. "They found something," Olivia said, her voice tight. "We need to go. Now." "The airstrip," Marcus responded, pulling out of the parking lot with forced casualness. 20 minutes, we're in the air. By tonight, we're in a country with no extradition treaty." But they'd underestimated how quickly the net would close. Before they'd even reached the highway, 3 patrol cars were in pursuit, sirens wailing. "Faster!" Olivia snapped, her composure cracking. Marcus floored the accelerator, the Mercedes surging forward as they merged onto the highway. The speedometer climbed, 70, 80, 90 miles per hour. Other cars swerved out of their way as they wove through traffic, police vehicles in close pursuit. Detective Chen's voice came over the police radio, calm and authoritative. "All units, suspects are headed north on Highway 101. Set up roadblocks at exits 47 and 49. Spike strips authorized if necessary." In the Mercedes, Marcus's hands were white-knuckled on the steering wheel. "We can make it. The exit's just ahead." But as they approached exit 48, 2 patrol cars pulled across both lanes, forming a barrier. Marcus jerked the wheel, trying to avoid collision, but he overcorrected. The Mercedes skidded, tires screaming against asphalt. Time seemed to slow as the vehicle spun, once, twice, before slamming sideways into the concrete barrier with a sickening crunch of metal. The impact deployed both airbags. For a moment, there was only the hiss of the damaged radiator and the wail of approaching sirens. Then Olivia was struggling with her seatbelt, blood trickling from a cut above her eyebrow, her eyes wild with panic. "We have to run," she gasped, finally getting the belt loose. Marcus slumped in the driver's seat, dazed from the impact. "Can't. I think my arm's broken." "Then you're useless to me." Olivia's coldness in that moment was absolute. She shoved her door open and stumbled onto the highway, looking around desperately for an escape route. But police vehicles were already surrounding them, officers emerging with weapons drawn. Down on the ground. "Now." Olivia ran. Despite the orders, despite the impossible odds, she ran. She vaulted over the highway barrier and scrambled down the embankment, her designer heels discarded within seconds. Behind her, she could hear officers giving chase, their radios crackling with updates. At the bottom of the embankment was a commercial area, warehouses, a small airfield for private planes. She'd been so close. So agonizingly close to freedom. She spotted a small terminal building and sprinted toward it, her lungs burning, her mind racing through options that were rapidly dwindling to zero. Inside the terminal's women's restroom, she locked herself in a stall and pulled items from her purse with shaking hands. A wig, blonde instead of her natural dark hair. Oversized sunglasses. A passport in the name of Rebecca Martinez. These were supposed to have been her insurance, her escape plan if things ever went wrong. She'd been so careful, so prepared. But as she struggled into the wig, she heard the restroom door bang open. Heavy footsteps. A woman's voice, firm and familiar. "Olivia Hartford, this is Detective Chin. There are 6 officers outside this restroom and a helicopter overhead. It's over. Come out now, and we can do this with dignity." Olivia stood frozen in the stall, staring at her reflection in the small mirror mounted on the door. The wig sat crooked on her head, the fake passport clutched in her trembling hand. She looked like what she was, a desperate woman in a bad disguise, cornered with nowhere left to run. For 5 long seconds, she considered fighting. Considered somehow talking her way out, using the charm and manipulation that had always worked before. But even she could read the room well enough to know those tactics were finished. "Olivia." Chen's voice again, quieter now. "That baby is fighting for his life right now. The least you can do is face what you've done." Something in those words, maybe the mention of Liam, maybe the exhaustion of maintaining the facade, made Olivia's shoulders slump. She unlocked the stall door and stepped out, the fake passport falling from her fingers to clatter on the tile floor. Detective Chin stood with 2 female officers flanking her. The detective's expression held no triumph, only grim satisfaction. "Olivia Hartford, you're under arrest for attempted murder, child endangerment, conspiracy to commit murder, and attempted flight to avoid prosecution." As Chen recited her rights and one of the officers cuffed her wrists, Olivia felt the weight of her choices crushing down on her. She'd been so close to having everything: Sylvester's money, his connections, his empire. The baby had been the only obstacle. Just one small obstacle that she tried to remove quietly, carefully, without suspicion. But she'd underestimated the maid. The quiet, powerless maid who should have been too scared to speak up. That miscalculation had cost her everything. Karen was still in the hospital consultation room when Detective Chen returned, looking exhausted but carrying something that might have been satisfaction in her expression. "Ms. Mitchell," Chen said, pulling up a chair, "I owe you an apology. We found sedatives in Olivia Hartford's bathroom, same type that was in Liam's system. We also found messages between her and Sylvester's investment advisor plotting what appears to have been a scheme to gain access to the Donovan fortune, with Liam as the primary obstacle." Karen felt tears spring to her eyes. "Then you believe me? I'm not going to be charged. You're completely cleared. In fact, you're likely the only reason that baby is alive right now. If you hadn't noticed what was happening, if you hadn't tried to speak up." Chin shook her head. "Olivia Hartford and Marcus Kellerman are both in custody. And I want you to know, you did everything right. You tried to protect that child in an impossible situation." The relief was so overwhelming that Karen nearly collapsed. All the fear, all the guilt, all the nights lying awake wondering if she could have done more, it poured out of her in great, shaking sobs. Detective Chen handed her a box of tissues and waited patiently until Karen could breathe again. "What happens now?" Karen finally managed to ask. "Now, justice happens. We build the case and they face trial." Chen stood to leave, then paused. "Oh, and Karen? Mr. Donovan asked if he could speak with you. I think there are some things he needs to say." 10 minutes later, Karen's phone rang. The name on the screen made her hands shake: Sylvester Donovan. She answered on the 3rd ring. "Hello. Karen." His voice was wrecked, broken in a way that money and power could never protect against. "Karen, I don't even know how to begin to apologize." "Mr. Donovan. Please, just listen." She could hear him struggling to compose himself. "You tried to tell me. You tried to warn me, and I didn't listen. I chose to believe someone who was hurting my son over someone who was trying to protect him. My own arrogance, my own blindness." His voice broke. "Liam almost died because I wouldn't listen to you. Karen closed her eyes, tears streaming down her face. Is he going to be okay? The doctors say. They say he's stable. They think he'll recover fully, but it's going to take time. Karen, I know I have no right to ask anything of you after what I put you through, but would you come see him? When he wakes up, I want him to see a face he trusts. I want him to see you. The request hung in the air between them, weighted with guilt, hope, and the fragile possibility of redemption. Yes, Karen whispered. Of course I'll come. She heard Sylvester's breath catch in what might have been a sob of relief. Thank you. Thank you. I'll make sure security knows to let you in. And Karen? I'm going to spend the rest of my life making sure you're respected and valued for what you did. I promise you that. When the call ended, Karen sat in the quiet room and let herself finally, fully break down. She'd been vindicated, cleared, proven right. But more importantly, Liam was going to survive. The baby she'd tried so hard to protect was going to live. Sometimes, she thought, remembering her grandmother's words once more, sometimes courage meant standing up even when you knew you'd be knocked down. Sometimes truth meant speaking even when no one wanted to listen. And sometimes, just sometimes, that courage and truth were enough to save a life. 3 days after Olivia's arrest, Karen stood outside Liam's hospital room as Dr. Patricia Morrison delivered her full assessment to Sylvester. Through the partially open door, Karen could hear every devastating word. Mr. Donovan, the toxicology reports paint a disturbing picture, Dr. Morrison said, her voice professionally gentle but unflinching. Liam's system shows evidence of repeated sedation over at least a 2-week period. The buildup in his tissues indicates this wasn't a one-time incident. He was being systematically drugged. Karen heard Sylvester's sharp intake of breath. The bruising patterns are also consistent with non-accidental trauma, the doctor continued. Grip marks on his arms, pressure points on his torso. These injuries were inflicted by someone much larger and stronger. Given his age, there's no way these were self-inflicted or accidental. Karen tried to tell me. Sylvester's voice was hollow, broken. She showed me the bruises. She warned me about the bottles. And I fired her for it. I believed Olivia's lies over Karen's truth. Mr. Donovan, Dr. Morrison said quietly, the most important thing now is that Liam is safe. Ms. Mitchell's intervention, even though it wasn't immediately believed, ultimately saved your son's life. The sedatives were increasing in dosage. Another few days, and we might be having a very different conversation. Karen pressed her hand to her mouth, suppressing a sob. She'd known it was bad, but hearing it laid out so clinically made the horror of what almost happened unbearably real. A moment later, Sylvester emerged from the room, his eyes red and haunted. When he saw Karen, he walked straight to her and did something she never expected. He pulled her into a desperate embrace. "I'm sorry," he whispered, his voice breaking. "I'm so sorry. You saved him. You saved my son." 6 months later, Karen sat in the witness box of a packed courtroom, her hands clasped tightly in her lap to keep them from shaking. The trial of Olivia Hartford and Marcus Kellerman had drawn national attention, a billionaire's glamorous girlfriend and his trusted advisor conspiring to murder an infant for inheritance money. The media circus outside was relentless, but inside this courtroom, Karen focused only on the truth she'd come to tell. Olivia sat at the defense table in a conservative suit, her styling deliberately understated, her expression carefully neutral. But when her eyes met Karen's, there was no remorse, only cold calculation, as if she were still trying to find an angle, still looking for a way to manipulate the outcome. "Ms. Mitchell," the prosecutor began, "please tell the court what you witnessed during your employment at the Donovan mansion." Karen took a deep breath and began. She recounted every detail, the midnight threat, the cloudy bottles, the bruises that appeared and disappeared, the locked nursery doors, the warning to stay silent. Her voice shook at times, but she pushed through, driven by the memory of Liam's terrified cries and the knowledge that her silence had almost cost him his life. During cross-examination, Olivia's defense attorney tried to paint Karen as a disgruntled employee with an overactive imagination, someone jealous of Olivia's position and willing to fabricate accusations. But the physical evidence, the sedatives, the messages, the security footage, told a story no amount of legal maneuvering could rewrite. When it was Olivia's turn to testify, she maintained her innocence with practiced ease, painting herself as a loving stepmother wrongly accused by a conspiracy of jealous staff and overzealous investigators. But under cross-examination, her facade began to crack. When confronted with her own text messages discussing loose ends and obstacles, her composure fractured into brittle defensiveness. Marcus Kellerman had already accepted a plea deal in exchange for testimony against Olivia, detailing how they'd planned to gain control of Sylvester's fortune through a combination of manipulation, eventual marriage, and the elimination of the primary heir. His testimony was damning, methodical, and utterly without remorse. The jury deliberated for less than 4 hours. On the charge of attempted murder in the first degree, we find the defendant, Olivia Hartford, guilty. The words rang through the courtroom like a bell. Karen felt Sylvester's hand squeeze her shoulder from where he sat in the row behind her. On the charge of conspiracy to commit murder, guilty. On the charge of child endangerment resulting in serious bodily harm, guilty. On the charge of attempted flight to avoid prosecution, guilty. When the judge handed down the sentence, life imprisonment without the possibility of parole, Olivia's mask finally, completely shattered. She screamed, lunging toward the prosecutor's table before bailiffs restrained her. "This is wrong. I didn't do anything wrong. That baby was in the way. He was." Her attorney managed to silence her, but the damage was done. Even in her breakdown, Olivia had confirmed every accusation against her. As they led her away in handcuffs, Karen felt no triumph, only a profound sadness that someone could harbor such cruelty toward an innocent child. But she also felt something else, relief. Justice had been served. Liam was safe. The nightmare was finally, truly over. The months that followed were a journey of slow, steady healing. Liam underwent therapy to address the trauma, working with specialists who understood infant psychology and attachment disorders. Karen was there for every session, her presence a constant source of stability and comfort. Sylvester had transformed. The confident billionaire who'd been so certain of his judgments now moved through the world with humility and awareness. He'd stepped back from several business ventures, reorganized his priorities, and focused entirely on being the father Liam deserved. "I let charm blind me to character," he told Karen one evening as they watched Liam play with building blocks in the mansion's living room. "I was so used to people wanting something from me that I mistook manipulation for genuine affection. I'll never make that mistake again." He'd apologized to Karen countless times, but she could see the growth went deeper than words. He listened now. He observed. He questioned his assumptions and trusted the people who genuinely cared about his son. At his insistence, Karen had been rehired, not as a maid, but as Liam's primary caregiver and a trusted member of the household. Her salary tripled, her quarters upgraded, and most importantly, her voice was valued. When she expressed concerns or offered suggestions, Sylvester listened with the attention he should have given her from the beginning. The mansion itself had changed. Sylvester had renovated, bringing in warmer colors, softer lighting, and furniture that invited comfort rather than displaying wealth. The cold, echoing spaces that had unsettled Karen on her first day were now filled with Liam's laughter, the sound of music, and the warmth of a home rather than a showpiece. Karen and Sylvester's relationship evolved into something neither of them had expected, a partnership rooted in shared trauma, mutual respect, and a common purpose, protecting and nurturing Liam. They weren't romantic, but they were family in the truest sense, bound together by the child they both loved and the darkness they'd survived together. She changed him into his pajamas, read him his favorite story about a brave little lion, and sang the lullaby her grandmother had taught her, the same one she'd sung on her very first day in this house. Liam's eyelids grew heavy, his thumb finding its way to his mouth, his breathing evening into the peaceful rhythm of approaching sleep. Karen gently placed him in his crib, the same crib where she'd once found Olivia standing with such threatening stillness. But that memory no longer held power over this space. The nursery had been repainted, redecorated, transformed into a place of genuine warmth and security. As she tucked the blanket around Liam and watched him drift into sleep, Karen noticed the silence. Not the sharp, unnatural silence that had terrified her that midnight so long ago, but the gentle, peaceful quiet of a safe child in a loving home. She smiled softly, running her fingers gently through Liam's soft hair. He stirred slightly, murmured something that might have been "Mama," and settled deeper into sleep. Karen's heart swelled with gratitude and love. This child was safe. This family was healing. And she had played a part in making that possible, not through wealth or power, but through simple courage and refusing to stay silent in the face of cruelty. As she turned off the nursery light and left the door slightly ajar, she whispered words her grandmother had once told her: "The smallest voice can echo the loudest when it speaks the truth." Downstairs, Sylvester was reading business reports but looked up with a smile when Karen entered. "He's down. Out like a light." "Karen," Sylvester set aside his papers, "I know I say this too often, but I need you to hear it again. You saved my son's life. You stood up when you had every reason to stay silent. You're the real hero of this story." Karen shook her head gently. "I'm not a hero. I'm just someone who couldn't ignore a child in danger, even when it would have been easier to look away." "That's exactly what makes you a hero," Sylvester replied quietly. "Real courage isn't about grand gestures. It's about doing what's right even when it costs you everything." As Karen settled into the comfortable chair across from him, she reflected on the journey that had brought them here. She'd learned that truth, no matter how long it takes, eventually rises to the surface. She'd learned that real strength isn't found in wealth or status, but in compassion, integrity, and the willingness to stand up for those who cannot stand up for themselves. Most importantly, she'd learned that even the quietest voice, the voice of a maid with no power, no connections, no influence, could change the course of a life when it refused to be silenced by threats or fear. Olivia's era had ended behind bars, her schemes and cruelty finally contained. Liam was thriving, surrounded by people who truly loved him. And Karen had found not just a job, but a family, a purpose, and the proof that courage from the unseen truly can save lives. The mansion that once held secrets and shadows was now filled with light, laughter, and the peaceful knowledge that justice had prevailed. And in the nursery upstairs, baby Liam slept soundly, safe at last, protected by the woman who'd refused to stay silent and the father who'd finally learned to listen. Courage from the unseen can change destinies. Truth cannot remain hidden forever, even in the shadows of wealth. Real strength is not in power or status, but in compassion and accountability. Karen proved that even someone with little voice can become a force of justice. Sylvester learned that true leadership begins with humility and awareness. And Liam grew up safe because one woman refused to stay silent in the face of cruelty. The end. Thank you for watching this story to the end. If you enjoyed this story, you will surely love the next one. It's as crazy and more intriguing as you can ever imagine. So do check it out. Click on the image showing on your screen right now to watch the next one.